Well, what's going on, world? Welcome back once again to the ASCENT Academy. Good morning, Bridget. How are you this morning?
I am well. Happy Pisces season.
Happy Pisces season. Yes, it is. Well, welcome everyone. Today we're going to dive deep into a very interesting topic. It's going to require us kind of be open-minded and be a little introspective and kind of share some of our thoughts and concepts of just what it means to be self-aware. And as the title said, going into this, we're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly parts of it. And not to say that the ugly pieces are something that you should fear necessarily. It's just, again, the whole point of it is self-awareness, right? And
Right.
understanding that there are going to be pieces and parts of self-awareness as we dig through this and kind of explain what self-awareness is all about, some of the things that you can look for that maybe show you have low self-awareness, and some of the things that then maybe we can start to work on to build that foundation of self-awareness within yourself and within the world around you, and why that's important. So just getting a feel for the good pieces, the pieces that may be a little bit more challenging, and then why it really is at the end of the day all relevant as we move forward. So, Bridget, why don't you give us a little bit more background on just self-awareness itself and why we even brought this to the table? Because between you and I, it's something we talk about all the time.
And as you said, there it is something that we've been talking about for this whole year, 22 into 23 is as well. And I think in the summertime when we had the whole series, I really thought I was self-aware until I kind of dug into what that meant and then the work that it took behind that to get to that point. And so when I did, I really realized then that I was not as self-aware as I thought. And
Mm,
so one quote that I like is Socrates said, "To know thyself is the beginning of wisdom."
correct.
So we think, in a natural that having the book knowledge, having the street knowledge, etc., those type of things are how we achieve wisdom. Even life experience is how we achieve wisdom. But what I found out that translates to me as nothing can compare to the knowledge of yourself, of thyself.
Mhm.
Once you understand that.
So true, and that's a great thing that you went back to when we did do the 5 T's throughout the summer last year, and just talk about the transformation through transparency, truth, and trust. A lot of that when we went through that series really did have you go, wait a minute, I thought I was here, but now that I
Mhm.
really started to peel back the layers a little bit, you started to realize I'm not as far along or in the place that I thought I was. So there's room for growth. There's room to still evolve a little bit. And I think we both experienced some of that. And I'm hoping some of our audience members and that kind of followed us through that process kind of had that same experience. And this is what brought
Absolutely.
us back to, wanting to do self-awareness now. And we laugh a lot about self because that's a word that between you and I, we could probably say it, 15, 20 times in like 30 seconds because it's a part
Mhm.
of just how we look at self-awareness and self-esteem and just self all kinds of different things and why that's relevant. So moving forward to just kind of give a little background on what we see the relevance of self-awareness is, as well as maybe some of the pitfalls. And this is kind of, we're going to start with the bad slash ugly pieces of it to give you a feel for what we mean there. But first I want to talk about what one of the things that brews from self-awareness as far as starting you down that road, and it's that word of introspection or being introspective. So I want to go back to that now because I think we're going to probably use that quite a bit as we go through it, and I want to make sure that our audience is kind of tracking with what
Mhm.
that means, right? So when we say introspective, that's that whole looking in versus looking out. And the best analogy I can give for that, which always makes sense, is we can all be guilty at times when things are not going our way and we're having some challenges to want to point the finger, this, they, them, the world, whatever is going on, right? Is what the issue is. And it's not to say that sometimes that might not be true. And Bridget, you use it all the time. It says, what part did I play in this? Right. So that's that introspective piece of asking the question of what or why, so that you start to dig into it a little bit. The other thing that I always say is if you're pointing out at something, you have three fingers pointing back at you, right? So that's a 3-to-1 ratio. So you really need to start to use your thought process, I think, kind of in that same way. Yeah, you do need to do some due diligence and have some understanding about what's happening out in the world because that's relevant. But those three fingers pointing back at you are basically saying there's a 3x factor that's there that maybe you need to look at where it resonated with you, how you were involved, what roles did you play, etc. What are your thoughts on that?
And it's easier to point at someone else. I mean, because if we talk, if I'm having a conversation with you, right, about what someone did to me, I could probably spend 5 minutes or so, because 5 minutes is long, on what they did.
Mhm.
And I would never mention me. Just, well, I'm like this because when I was 12, and then when I was 15, and then, and then this happened, and then this happened, and this happened to me. I can spend a lifetime talking about that, but it's very seldom that I say, well, what I did and how it affected me, and and better yet, how I responded, because that
Mhm.
is the big key, is how I responded to whatever it was that happened. And so it's
Mhm.
easier to say what they did.
Mhm.
It's really, even if we didn't cause the problem or the situation or the negative feelings, it's still easy to say what that other person did, or what that environment did, or what that community did, or what that church did. It's easy to say that and talk about that instead of identifying, well, how did I respond to that? Based on
Absolutely.
my feelings, how did I respond? What did I do? What did I do? What was my part in that? And so what I found from last year up until today is, being self-aware is nothing about the outside distractions and the outside influences. It
Mhm.
has nothing to do with it. Maybe the
Right.
feeling, the situation, maybe those things have something to do with the outside, but it's still not about that. It's about how you respond, how it makes you feel, and feeling your feelings, and then identifying those feelings, and moving in that, to become more self-aware, so that in the future, moving forward, you'll know how to react to all those different situations.
Absolutely. And, I want to go talk a little bit about that too, because the thing you brought up was the reaction piece. And often we talk about what you can control and what you can't control. And I think that's one of the key components of becoming more self aware is starting to really understand that how you respond is the thing you actually do have control over. It's the biggest piece you have control over. However, you have to be able to process your way through the feelings, the emotions, the hows, the whys, the whats of what went on, what transpired, so that when you do respond or react, you are coming from a place that's true to you, that you understand, and you understand why you're reacting or responding in the way that you are. And I think that's the biggest thing that we really would like to see people take away from today when we talk about self-awareness is how to essentially be able to get control of your feelings, your emotions, to be able to filter your way through those different things so that when those things happen, you can be able to respond and react in a proper way, in a way that's more fitting to the situation and not just placing blame somewhere else, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, as you work your way through it.
Right. And it takes work, that takes some work that we may not even want to do. And we'll talk about that later, because
Mhm.
we have to dig inside.
Right, right, absolutely. So then let's start to talk about what it may look like when I'm going to use the term say when you have low self-awareness. Not you have no, but low self-awareness, right? So some of the things that you might want to start to look out for from a behavior standpoint. And again, we're always going to try to focus as best we can on the behavior itself and not necessarily the individual because we're not placing this or coming at this from the standpoint of calling someone out or you
Mhm.
have a problem. It's because it usually shows itself in the ways of different behaviors, right? So some of the things that to be on the lookout for would be things like defensive. Are you always taking a defensive posture? Every situation you walk into, something goes wrong, somebody says something, someone does something, and you immediately jump on the defense, right? And that's the position that you take and the position you feel like you need to be in. So being defensive is one piece. Another piece, which is a big one, and this goes back to what we covered last year, where we were doing the transparency, truth, and trust, is the trust piece.
Mhm.
Basically, in every situation you walk into, you don't just start from a baseline of granting someone trust. You're distrusting You show no confidence, no trust. You don't give anyone the latitude to allow them to be who they are without judgment, et cetera, because you're in this distrusting place right out of the gate, right? So that's also a component of self-awareness. Arrogance is one. And that's we actually did a whole podcast where we were talking about the whole thing about kind of getting out of your own way, but then also being arrogant and
Mhm.
that whole piece of it. And that's just a key component, I think, to self-awareness, putting that arrogance piece, and you're always blaming others and feeling like you're superior to them. You're always right, they're always wrong. They're in, I know some people do struggle with the shade of gray, right? That middle space where, it's not definitively black and white, right? But that's kind of in some ways, how the world runs. So we need to kind of get used to some of those things too. And then the last one I want to bring on is being empathetic, or showing sympathy or empathy, right? If you're at that from a behavior, these are behaviors. If you're coming at most things, just talk to the hand. I have no empathy, no sympathy for your situation, for you. That type of behavior, those are some of the things where it might be keys that we might need to start to really dig into what our self-awareness is. What do you
And
think about
I feel like all the characteristics that you name are drawn from fear,
that?
and is a way of coping.
Okay.
Not being empathetic, not being compassionate. It's a fear factor, because then I can, if I'm compassionate, if I have empathy, then I have to be transparent. Then I have to open up.
Mhm.
um if I think I'm always right, and I'm arrogant, then I know for me. And we talked about when I was in high school, and how my coping mechanism was, people thought I was, bougie or what have you, and I didn't want to talk to people, and I didn't want to be around people. I didn't fit in. I didn't feel like I fit in. And now I may be bougie for another reason, but back
Right.
then I didn't feel like I fit in. And so,
Mm.
yeah, it was a coping mechanism for me. And so I think all those are drawn from fear
Okay.
of what I would have to display, of myself to the world. Fear of what
Mm.
you think of me now, that I'm being transparent, I'm being open, I have empathy, I have compassion. I'm not doing tit for tat. I'm sitting with that, what you told me about what happened and how I made you feel. I'm sitting with that and how I made you feel, and not, oh, well, you made me feel this way, and so, and that's a big thing for me, the tit for tat. And so I think that's just a way of coping, in a way, and it's drawn from fear. And so you have to peel back those layers to get to a place where you're aware of what you're actually doing and why.
Correct. Right. So, and that's where a lot of the challenge comes in, is to effectively start to go about becoming more self-aware. You have to kind of go look at the past. And I think that's where a roadblock actually comes up for a lot of people, right? Because I don't want to go back and revisit the feelings or the emotions of that situation. But that's actually the work that needs to be done, because that's
Mhm.
what's going to help you understand you and process through why you felt this way, why you reacted in that particular situation in a certain way. So you have a historical database, and we all do, because we all have had the lives that we've led. And
Mhm.
go back, look at some of those situations. Okay, what part did I play? Why did I react this way? What could have been done differently or better, from my standpoint? Because yeah, you can't control the other person, and a lot of the times you can't even control the situation itself. But
Mhm.
how you responded, how you reacted, how you dealt with the situation is 100% within your control. And so I think
And-
that's a key thing, is people don't want to, it's like, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. But, see through the fingers and start to really look back and be honest with yourself when you do it.
And the key thing to that is, it's so freeing. And I've
Yeah.
said that over and over again. It's so freeing. And I remember, and I think I've talked about it before, I was asked to be a part of an anthology. And I had to write about my past, right?
Mhm.
And how I went from there to here. And that was painful, because I had to really, if I'm going to write something that someone wants to read, it has to be read worthy. And so that means I had to open up myself, and I had to look at all the things that I gone through and how I responded to those things, and some of the things that I caused. And
Mhm.
so I had to go back and look at all those things. And then when you put it on paper, it becomes real, right? And then I had to read it over and over again. So when you edit, before someone edited, I had to read it over and over again. And it kept hitting over and over again what had happened and how I responded and how they responded and blah, blah, blah. And so that was freeing for me, because then I could work with that. I gave myself something to work with, instead of just acting like I didn't have a past and none of those things happened. And so now we're just going to start over, because a lot of people just like to start over from scratch. And that's not how life works. Yeah, you have a do-over, or a chance to move forward from the things that have happened in the past. But we all know that we're all a sum of our lives are a sum of all of our experiences, right? So we can't negate that, and we can't act like that didn't happen. And so it's freeing. It was freeing for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a very true statement. So now I want to bring to the table and some of the things to start to questions, I guess, basically to ask yourself to start to evaluate,
Mm-hmm.
where are you on this sliding scale of self-awareness, right? So questions that you can be asked would be something like this. Do you actually know what makes you tick? A lot of people
Right.
say, do you truly kind of understand self, right? So let's start there. What makes you tick? And as Bridget mentioned a minute ago, sometimes you need to write these things down, because putting it on paper gives it a whole different context, I think. And it also, I think, helps to get what you're thinking, and especially what you're feeling, into words. And that really helps, and that really matters. So when you're asking yourself these questions, still note it, keep a journal or something like that. Another thing is, what about your triggers? What are the things that others may do, or that you are aware of, may even be unaware of at this point, that trigger you in different ways? It really would be good to capture and get your head around what those things are, because
Mm-hmm.
that's going to really help you start to build better self-awareness when you understand where those touch points are that people can trigger you with. Um, and then just general needs. What do you need, want, desire to have in your life? Um, and again, capturing some of that information, because if your needs aren't being met, and Bridget, you talk about this all the time, there's a problem. That's a major problem in
Mm-hmm.
what's going on with you, because
Mm-hmm.
not having your needs met puts you mentally, emotionally, spiritually into just not a good place, right?
Mm-hmm.
But first and foremost, you have to be self-aware enough to know, what are those needs? What
Yes.
do you need, right? And then the last one I want to thought is meaning, and meaning, asking that question from the standpoint of what's relevant to you. What's the value you place on the different things that you do have in your life, career, family, etc. What do those things mean to you? What are the meanings of those different things? Uh, Bridget, I know you have some experience working with this, and especially working with your girls when you have to kind of help them with their self-esteem and self-awareness.
Because there's a lot to identify, right? And so you have to look inward and introspect. You have to go in and do the work. And so, especially with identifying what makes you tick, or what are your triggers,
Mm-hmm.
because we can, if you don't carefully observe the triggers, you go off. Somebody say something, and then you don't even notice it when you come back and like, okay, well, why did I do that? If you don't ask those questions, whys and the whats, then your triggers, you'll have triggers all your life, and you'll be the mad black woman, or the mad black
The mad black woman, yes,
or
absolutely.
whatever.
Uh-huh.
So you'll have these triggers, or so then if you identify the triggers, you can remove yourself away from, okay, I see how this is about to affect me.
Mm-hmm.
I know how this is going to affect me. I know where this conversation is going. I guess I need to put a pin in it and move and
Mm-hmm.
step away from it. I know when they do this, I do this, or when I'm here around this circle, this is what's going to happen. So you have to identify those tricks and those triggers, so that you can know where to place yourself, and you're the only person that you have control of. Right.
Absolutely.
And so
Right.
another thing that I really believe in is your needs. If you don't identify your needs, you won't know if they're met. And needs can change from season to season, especially with, age, they all change. We all know that.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't identify what those are, you don't know when they're fulfilled. And that was one for me, because I had the need to please. And
Mhm.
so that's real broad. So you're all over the place, right? And
Mhm.
so when I said now, no is bae. So I learned how to say no. But first I had to identify what needs were not being met for me,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
vice versa, who, the needs that I wasn't meeting for other people, but it was most importantly what needs were not being met for me. And I wouldn't know if they were met or not if I didn't know what those needs are. And we think we have, it's real surface, but it's not.
Correct.
It's not.
Absolutely.
Especially when
Yeah.
you look at some of the things that happened in your life and how you responded to it, it goes back to what was your need and what was your expectation at the time.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely right. And as I said, those three, and that's just, four simple things. What makes you tick? What are your triggers? What are your needs? And what's the meaning, the relevance of the things that you have in your life? Just getting some general concepts and perceptions of what those things are all about. And again, I think the best way to do it is to take some time and actually ask those questions and just write it down, right? So now
And
that gives you a baseline, right?
And I was thinking, in order to elevate you in that, you also have to know people and resources that you can count on and reach out to for the strength and inspiration. Because even though we're talking about self-awareness and self, we also need a community, right? A
Mhm.
village that's going to
Mhm.
support us in that. And so we have to build ourselves around a circle of people, what have you, or a village of people that you can count on for that strength and that inspiration to continue to show up as your authentic self. And I think that's very important, because if you start to do the research and the work on, being self-aware, then you put yourself in the same environments, that you have triggers, or the same environment that, does not fulfill your needs, then there's no need to do the work.
Absolutely. Absolutely right. And that's a perfect segue to what I wanted to talk about next, because what I want to bring to the table now, self-awareness is one piece, but then let's talk about the end game of this. And for me, in my mind, obviously, yes, the awareness is a big piece, but another self term is self acceptance, right? Because that's where you really need to get to. That's what's going to help you have that kind of shield, that coat of armor on you when you get to that point of just being truly self accepting. However, to get there, this is, we're talking about the good, the bad, the ugly. You got to get through some of the bad and the ugly pieces of it, because one of the things that's going to be required to do that is that you truly face the realities of you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big one. And I know, Bridget, you got some things you like to chime in when we start talking about that.
Yes. It's that mirror, right? You have to look at it. I did do an exercise with my girls, at the beginning of every year, and I hold a mirror up to them, and I want them to tell me, what do they see. I mean, not the physical aspect. Who do they see in this mirror? And they tend to look over and see what their friends are saying, or and what their friends said. Well, you have pretty eyes. Which I have pretty eyes. No, not what she says
Mhm.
about you. What do you see in you? And so that's hard, to look in the mirror and start to dig deep into why we think the way we think, why we respond the way we respond, how we process our feelings, where are our behaviors stemming from.
Mhm.
And that may have to do a lot about our environment, our surroundings, our upbringings. But if you're a grown person at this point, you have to start doing the work on you, and not take all those things into consideration. Yeah, you're some of that, but you have to start looking into you. And it was hard for me,
Mhm.
because people would tell me things, you don't listen, and I think I've said I'm very transparent, guys. You listen, but you're not listening to hear. I mean, understand, you're listening to hear. And I had to go back and say, am I doing that? And then I had to do
Mhm.
the work, and still doing the work to rectify that, because um when you are doing, when you're not looking at yourself, you tend to focus on what everybody else, and when you start to look at yourself, you tend to find out that you may have been some of the problem.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that's a
Absolutely.
hard pill to swallow.
Yeah.
And
I,
so
I,
that is why the you work is necessary.
yeah. Without question. And it's interesting. We had a comment here from one of our users, on Facebook. Somebody was one of our viewers, and they're saying, "Yike!" That can be scary. They put LOL, but yes, it can be scary. It can be
Hmm.
very scary to um, that. realities of you. And then the key component of that is, as I said, you've got to get not only identify these things, all right, from a reality. This is what's in my face. This is what I'm about. There's no such thing as perfection. We did a complete podcast on that. So we all know there are going to be some faults and some different things that are happening. So what are those realities? Now, to be able to truly move forward with yourself and get to this place of peace and comfort and everything else, acceptance. You've got to just accept, okay, this is who I am. This is what makes me tick, as we talked about before. These are some of the things that trigger me. It's not that those things are going to stop triggering you. You just need to learn how to manage those things better, to identify, as you said earlier, what's causing it, what's the root of it, et cetera, et cetera. And then now you can, because you have a better, quote unquote, as we're here, awareness of it all, manage it and respond, and your responses come from a different place. And the place it's coming from is what we're talking about. And the reason we think this is so relevant, your responses, how you manage, the things you feel you can have better control over, is because you are now more self-aware of all things. And the main thing is self-acceptance being, I think, one of the biggest pieces of that.
Right. And it's not in family. We're not talking about, well, this is just how I am. We're not talking about that. Yes, you have identified how you are. We're talking about, think about, this is just how I am. And do you need to do some work to make a shift somewhere or to change something?
Right.
So that, not so that everybody else will be okay with you, but so that you will be okay with you. Because I know
Right.
a lot of people say, well, this is how I am, but okay, but that's not, you're not right. And you and not you're not making me feel wrong, but I know you're making you feel wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so identify those things and then do the work to make a shift or make a change in some of those areas. Because it can be changed.
It and as you said, and that you brought up the term fear earlier, and I would say that's probably one of the biggest components that is a roadblock, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just the fear of um, getting to the acceptance piece of it, the fear of just dealing with having it in your face, quote unquote,
Mm-hmm.
what that means. But understanding thyself is, I think, a very, very important thing to work on as you move forward in life. Because I think a lot of people miss is not being in that place has such a
Mm-hmm.
ramification on your relationships, your career dynamics, and many,
Mm-hmm.
many other things that you could impact your life. So starting to put in some work and get past that fear really can, as you used the term earlier, evolve and elevate you in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest piece of it, I think, is bringing you to a place of peace. You don't have as much
Absolutely. Absolutely.
internal conflict and turmoil within yourself once you get to this place of self-acceptance. So with that said, Bridget, I know one of the things you wanted to share was kind of your journey
Mm-hmm.
and with becoming more self-aware and how the hows and whys of all of that. So how about you share with our audience kind of what that journey and what that path has been like for you?
And so I want to start by saying this, and I just kind of applauded myself here recently. Actually, I had made some decisions about my life and the path, and then but I hadn't been doing the work about self, and I kind of was leaning in on I don't know, and then I just had some other situation that happened about to bring clarity to the decision I was making, so I can make that turnaround. So I'm very proud of myself because I can identify what wasn't sitting well with my spirit or what wasn't sitting well with me about me. And I
Mm-hmm.
didn't ignore it like I had done in the past. Like, maybe because remember I talked about I didn't trust my own judgment about my own life and about the decisions I made in my own life. And so when I started to do the work and realize who I was and why I respond and why I say and why I think and why I feel, then I was able to say, okay, this is not how I want to feel. This is not what I want to do. This is not how I want to respond to life and, and showing up as myself. And so I made that turnaround. So I'm really proud of myself for that. But how I became more self-aware, I asked the what questions.
Mm,
And I read it and researched it, so I had to do it because it was on paper. I mean, it was written. So I was like, okay, let me do the what questions then. And I did the work to identify what negative and positive feelings I was experiencing in certain areas of my life. And I had to
mm,
write it down. I had to write it down so that it became real. And then I started to process what part, and I've said it before, what part did I play in it? What was my response to it? Because sometimes that affects the whole dynamic of the situation, how we respond to it, and what our part was. And then I started to identify ways I can make the shift, as I said, and which strengths do I possess to keep me focused on showing up as myself best self in every situation, because that situation may play out again in another with another person or another area of my life. And so I had to stay focused, and so I had to identify which strengths I had in me
mm, mm,
to keep me focused, and then play on those strengths. And then I also applied those that to those negative areas, and always kept my focus, and still keep my focus, and not on me and not the outside influences. And I feel like by doing that I can now identify my triggers right away, or sit with my thoughts instead of
mm,
versus my impulsive reactions. And it helps me to say no and yes with ease.
mm,
And that's it's a daily thing, and it's a weekly thing, it's a monthly thing, it's a yearly thing, I'm sure, to work on this. It's not, you haven't arrived, you know you
mhm,
I've learned
mhm,
that about myself. Even in doing the podcast, we go over a topic and we research it, and then we talk about it. And when we did the series, I felt like, oh, okay, well, I know about transforming truth and trust. And then here comes 3 months later, a situation happens, and I started to identify that I didn't really have it. I did not arrive. It's still some more work to do.
mhm, mhm.
So that is how I became more self-aware, and I'm still working on that to keep moving forward in every
Yeah,
situation of my life, in every
yeah.
every area of my life.
Thanks for sharing that. And I have a little bit of a story I'd like to share as well. Before I jump into that, I want to go back to what you were just saying about you haven't arrived. And I think that's, if there's a key thing to take away from this as well, it's that working your way through self awareness and getting self acceptance, etc. It's still just step one of one. And then there's
Hmm.
always going to be a step two, always. It doesn't matter where you are in life or how many years you've been working your way through this process, because situations change, people change, we all evolve, and we get placed in new situations as we work our way through life, and that gives us new experiences, and that may trigger emotions you didn't even know you had before, and many different things, right?
Right,
So that process continues. It's a journey of continuing to evaluate and trying to elevate yourself from a self-awareness standpoint. So interesting. And again, thanks for sharing your story. So let me give you a bit of background from my side of the fence when we talk about, self-awareness. Um, w- a word that it took me, I mean, it took me a while to get to the word. Then once I got there, it took me to a place of, I felt guilty, and I felt like, man, I'm being selfish and many other things. But now I have a different perspective on it because of self-awareness. And that word is freedom. And one of the things that I had, I guess, figured out about myself is freedom for me is paramount in my life, but not the literal sense of the word freedom. It's more the concept of freedom. So let me explain what I mean. So that's being able to be free of mind, free of thought, being able to be in a situation where you have more control, more guidance on the things you do in life, where you're going in your life. Uh, you're not, in that box per se. So just I got spiritual, emotional, and mental freedoms that are there, and I need those outlets. I need those pieces and parts of my life to be able to move and think freely and do those different things. So there were times in my life when that was the driver, and I didn't know that that was the driver, meaning freedom. I figured that part out. And once I figured it out, then it's like, well, why am I being too selfish or too self-centered, and having the guilt about keeping it all focused, I guess, to the way I wanted things to go. But then that's also what we talked about earlier in this, is from a self-awareness, self-acceptance standpoint. I had to go, all right, that's me. That's not going to change. That is a paramount thing in my life. So now what I need to do is become acceptant of that and then start to be okay with that, because that's going to bring me more towards a sense of peace. I'm not going to have that inner turmoil. And then what it also then allows me to do is respond back to the world from a place of calmness, from a place of self-acceptance. And it just opens your mind, opens your eyes, opens your heart in different ways. Uh, and again, it's not that I change that freedom is not important, because it is still the top thing on my list. But how I filter my way through that, and then how it ends up getting presented now, I think are totally different. So
Mhm.
that's kind of my journey over the last years and decades, however you want to look at it, uh, to getting just a better understanding of me and what my triggers and pressure points and what makes me tick and all those different types of things, and how I brought it to the table.
I like.
Right?
And freedom and peace go hand in hand.
It
You
they do.
know, that's all roads lead to it in terms of what we've experienced, you and I. Freedom and peace, it goes hand in hand, and we everything that we do, it leads to that, a place of peace, a place of freedom. In any relationship, you want to feel that in any situation, whether it be career or school or whatever wherever you are in your life right now, you want to have that place of freedom and that place of peace.
Absolutely. And I want to address the comment that we have here, and it says, only two things uh, uh, that constant in life is change and time, right? And that's very true. It, ever evolving, ever changing. And if there's anything again that you want to take away from today, it's to get comfortable or try to become more comfortable with continuing to evolve and change. Because if you are that personality or that type of person that says, I want the box to be this size and this shape, and I don't ever want it to change, but life has got some things for you, unfortunately,
It's
because
going to be real hard for you. It's going to be
gonna be
because
real hard.
I take pleasure in the change. I take pleasure in it because it means growth for me.
Right,
It means growth, and if I stop growing, then I'm dying.
right,
Mentally, whatever, I'm dying. So I welcome change. I welcome it because it means growth to me.
absolutely.
It's so
I,
important.
I could. What else you want to share on this before we start talking about the good pieces of it? I mean, the true benefits of becoming more self-aware.
I think we wrapped it all up in a pretty little package, and presented it. So
Okay.
let's get to the.
So let's talk about the good pieces, or some of the things that you can do to start to develop the good pieces. Um, and I think one of the biggest benefits, as you use some of the concepts we already talked about, ask those whys and those what questions, get it documented, uh, just so you better understand yourself. Where that leads you ultimately is going to be decision making is one piece. I think you absolutely, when you become more self-aware, more self-acceptant, make much better decisions, because you're processing at a rate and at a level that's just totally different when you have a lower self-awareness. So your decision making becomes much less effort to it, and also I think more beneficial type decisions that you do make.
Mhm.
Another piece of it is you also, I think, start to be able to see things from multiple sides. It doesn't just come from me, 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 me. This is how I see it. This is my view, my singular thought process. Because when you become more self aware, you are taking in a lot more data, and you're
Mhm.
respecting and going and working your way through that data. So you can start to understand, you know, this happened. Why did it happen to me? Why did they do this to me? Now, when you can process your way through and say, now I understand their perspective of where they were coming from, why they felt that way, why they reacted that way.
Mhm.
So you can now have those things as part of your decision making process, and also just seeing things from different perspectives. And I think that makes a huge, huge difference in how you respond to certain things. Bridget, what anything else that you have or that you thought of that you want to add to that list?
I was thinking as you were talking, just do the work. Because sometimes when we look at different experiences that we've had with people, let's just talk about negative experiences and how we responded. If we do the work and dig deep, we'll learn that most of our responses are the same for different situations
Correct.
because of something that we, experienced before, and we held on to that, and we
Mhm.
didn't learn from that. I always tell my kids, if you don't learn the lesson, you're going to come back to it. It's just like school. You're going to have to come back to it, whether it's life lessons or school lessons. You're going to have to come back to it and repeat it. So do the work so that you don't have to repeat the lesson, and then learn and observe how you respond to situations. And you'll find that, and I found that most of the time I respond the same way. No matter if it was a different situation, a different person, I was still responding the same way. And I had to dig deep to the why and the
Mhm.
what happened that
Mhm.
made me become this person, and why do I respond that way, and why do I feel like that when they say that. It's not just
Right.
surface, like, oh, they made me mad, but why does that make you mad? And why did
Mhm.
okay, well, they made me mad because I don't like what they said. Okay, well, they told you their opinion. Why does other people's opinion make you mad? And,
Mhm.
you have to dig and dig and dig to get to the self part of you. Because if
Mhm.
not, it's
Mhm.
going to always be about other people.
Yeah, and we talked about people pleasing. We have a video on that. We've dug deep into that whole thing and how that can impact you. And the other thing we talk about is, and I use the term and from one of my mentors, and he calls it goop. I think I mentioned this before.
Mhm.
GOOP. That's the good opinion of other people, right? And if you get stuck in the goop, and that's what's driving your decision making and what you're doing, you're gonna have challenges and problems because you're not being true to yourself. You're responding to other people's opinions, which the most important piece of that you don't control, right?
Mhm.
And they are sometimes on the outside looking in. They don't have the facts. They might not know the data, but they're willing to share their thoughts on it. And then you are then getting upset or angry, getting yourself all worked up over something that you really shouldn't, because
Mhm.
that is their opinion based on their perspective. That again, most times they don't have all of the facts to even bring it to the table in the first place.
And in that situation, I learned about myself is that I would get upset when people said something that was against what I thought, because I was upset because they didn't agree with me. So then I was upset because they didn't agree with me, because I wanted to please them. So them not agreeing with me meant that I wasn't pleasing, or I wasn't feeling the same way. So what are they going to do, or what are they going to say about me now? How are they going to feel about me? I mean, it was deep. It went deep.
Hmm.
For me to realize, well, you're just upset because they don't agree with you, because then that means that they're not pleased, and then now they may not like you or whatever. And so I had to really dig deep. And I see one of the Facebook one of our Facebook friends says success is on the other side of fear. Always, it is
Hmm.
always that one step on the other side of fear.
Hmm.
Always.
Absolutely. But that means step one of one is got to face that fear, right? You have
Mhm.
to
You
open
have
yourself up.
to.
Yeah, and be introspective and be truthful and honest with yourself. I think is the most important piece of it, because we can always gloss over it and do a kind of a surface thing, but doing a
Mhm.
surface thing is not going to get you where you need to be, right? It,
And I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, no,
I always ask a question to my girls: what would you do if you weren't afraid? And
mhm,
not like become an astronaut or anything like that. I'm talking about like on a weekly basis.
yeah,
What would you do if you were not afraid? Like what would you have done this week if you weren't scared? If you wasn't
mhm,
afraid? I mean, I could think of this week. It's been an amazing week. I could think of some things that if I wouldn't have been afraid, if I would have been afraid and let that stop me, what wouldn't have happened, or what would I have not experienced? And so, what would you do if you weren't afraid? And that's not something that something really big that you have to really deeply think about. What would you have done this week? What would you do next week? So like the Facebook user says, success is on the other side of fear. I always think on that thing. What would I do? What can I do if I'm not experiencing fear? What can
mhm,
I see? What can I accomplish? What can I create if I wasn't scared?
correct, absolutely. And a lot of that fear comes from judgment, the
Mm-hmm.
fear of being judged, as you said earlier, not being liked. They don't like me anymore. Oh God, the world's gonna end, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
just getting past that, because again, what you control is you, how you react and how you respond. How that person reacts and responds and all those things, you actually don't have control over anyway. So trying to get comfortable with that is all part of the self awareness piece. Um, and then as we said earlier, the journey of all of that, yes, you do have to be brave. You do have to open yourself up, as we talked about earlier, and we're talking about you know diving into self, right, and being the realities, the truths of yourself. But that's the work that it takes, and
Mhm.
that's the way you're going to advance your way through it. Final thoughts before we wrap up.
Um, I'm glad that we, touched on this topic of being special because we are almost into the third. What's this? The first quarter of 2023 already.
Already.
And so we, those that we talked at the beginning of the year of the things that we want to do and the goals that we want to accomplish for this year, and we are almost at the first quarter at the end, at the beginning. Where we're at the beginning of the third month, almost. And so we need to be really, we need to be really intentional about learning self as we try to create goals and complete goals and set out for accomplishments. We need to really think about what does that look like for us. Are we doing it for self, or what are we doing it for other people? What goals that we created this year already that is for us based on what we believe, what we feel, what we think, and how is that gonna look for us?
Yep.
So I'm glad that we came up. We brought this to our community. It's big, and I hope we go into the second what is the second quarter at the end of that and talk about it again, and how have becoming self-aware, how does that help us in the first 6 months of the year.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I could not agree more. So, takeaways from today, from a final thought standpoint for me is, um, just kind of remembering that yes, you have to be brave. You have to be honest and truthful with yourself, uh, and that the ultimate goal of this is, as Bridget talked about earlier, peace of mind, inner peace, uh, getting rid of that conflict and that turmoil that you may have within yourself because of the self-awareness slash self-acceptance pieces of it, right? So working your way in those directions, I think, are going to be the key components to it all.
Hmm.
And it's a lot. It can be a lot, but again, as my saying I say all the time about eating the elephant, right? How to eat the elephant, one bite at a time. So you
Hmm.
got to start, and just take it in pieces and move your way through it. If you do feel that, yes, it's a road you want to start to go down, but you don't have maybe some of the concepts, or don't how you would necessarily work that plan, I do have a new masterclass that the Ascent Academy has just released. And I want to bring that up to say it's a great way to start to answer those types of questions and truly reflect on self. So I'll pull it up. So this is Ascent Self Excellence Masterclass, and you can find that at ascentmasterclass.com. Right now, you can do a free preview of that. You can go through the first two modules. There's 6 modules total. So that may be something that you might want to take a quick look at. And I think that will help you kind of open up that can and really start to dive into what it means to become more self aware and work your way towards true self acceptance.
And I want to publicly applaud you for that because you have worked really hard, and I know that you have. And so pushing it out, I think that's great. I
Yeah.
applaud you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I think that's all we have for today, Bridget. Again, great session. Thank you. I thank our audience for joining. Those who shared comments, we always appreciate that, because the more interaction we get, the better it is for everyone. I hope you
Yes.
did have some good takeaways from today's session. And we will be doing more stuff coming up soon. And the last thing I want to just close with is, if you do have suggestions on different videos or podcasts or topics that you'd like to see us do at the Ascent Academy, drop me a DM or send me a message, and we will absolutely try to get those things on, because Bridget and I really are doing this as our way of giving back, and it's really about the audience and trying to help and guide you in different ways that we think you're going to get benefit from. So if there's a certain thing you'd like to see us do, absolutely let us know about that.
Let us know. And happy early birthday.
Thank you. Thank you. That's next week. So I take cash. I'll send everybody my cash app. No, no, just kidding. Uh, so and until then, everyone take care. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, Bridget. I'm sure we'll talk soon. Until then, bye now.
Bye.